I'm Brittany. This is Merlin. And welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch and read gay things. So, we get to continue with Captive Prince. Today, specifically Book 2, Prince's Gambit. We are, looks like kind of bang on halfway through. We are on page, as I wrestle the book open, we are on page 211 for chapter 13. We should be reading through chapter 16 today. And we landed on a, not the best development, really. What with, being knocked out and taken and all of that is a little bit of a cliffhanger, but that's why we're here. So we read for a couple of hours. We take a break somewhere around halfway through that I try to keep to 10 minutes or less. It's usually less than 10 minutes. Please no spoilers in the chat, as there are people who have never read this before who would obviously not like to be spoiled. I have read this before. I love this series dearly. Haven't read it in a little while. And also there are trigger warnings down in the description box that you can avail yourself of. And, if you've ever needed to rely on trigger warnings, especially for certain sexual topics and tropes, to try to put that gently, you should probably check out the trigger warnings. As always, I'm going to say it at the beginning of a stream instead of the end, but please take care of yourself. And use the trigger warnings. They are there if you need them. All right. Excuse me. I don't have this set up to where I can see you guys, but not, multiple versions of my face. So there we are. Lashed hard to one of the shaggy horses, Damon endured a dark, endless ride of sensation and of sound. The clustered beats thrown by horse hooves, the blowing of equine breath, the creak of saddlery. He could feel from the straining of the horse that for the most part they traveled up, away from Achielos, away from Ravenel, into mountains full of narrow paths on either side of which was, vertiginous, beetling, nothing. Guessing at the identity of his captors, he strove desperately to find opportunity. He strained against his bonds until he felt them cut into his flesh, but he was too well tied. And they didn't stop. His horse plunged beneath him, then pushed with its hind legs up a rise, and he was forced to give his attention to staying astride, rather than rolling from its back. There was no way free. Struggling or throwing himself sideways from the back of a horse would mean a fall of many cliff lengths before coming to a stop, or, more likely, considering the bindings, a long period of being dragged along sharp rocks. And it would not help Laurent. After what seemed like hours, he felt his horse finally slow, then stop. A second later, Damon was pulled from the horse roughly, and landed badly. The gag was pulled from his mouth, the blindfold was pulled from his eyes. His hands remained tied behind his back as he pushed up onto his knees. His first impression of the camp flickered. Far to his right, the flames of a large central campfire leapt high in the light evening wind, casting gold and red over the faces that ringed it. Closer to where he knelt, the men were dismounting from horses, and the air was shadowed and mountain cool, outside the fire's circle of heat. Seeing the camp confirmed his worst guess. He knew the clans as stateless riders without settlements, fringing the hills. They were ruled by women and lived off wild meats, fish from the streams, sweet roots, and for the rest they raided the villages. These men were not that. This was an entirely masculine force, who had been riding together for some time, and knew how to use their weapons. These were the men who had destroyed Terrassus, the men that he and Laurent had been seeking, but who had found them instead. They needed to get away, now. Out here, Laurent's death would have a believability that might never be achieved again, and Damon was sickly aware of all the reasons why they might have been brought back to camp beforehand. But there was no form of fireside sport that didn't end with them both dead. He looked instinctively for a pale head, and found it to his left. Laurent was dragged forward by the same man who had ordered him bound, and he hit the ground as Damon had done, shoulder first. Damon watched Laurent push himself up into a sitting position, and from there, with the slightly altered balance of a man whose hands are lashed behind his back, to his knees. He received a sideways blue-eyed glance at the halfway point and saw everything he believed reflected in that hard single look. "This time, don't get up," was all Laurent said. Laurent rose to his feet, calling out something to the leader of the clansmen. It was a mad, reckless gambit. A prince's gambit, you say? Well, I'll be damned. We came very close to getting a title there. Along the border, the regent's messenger was riding southward to Ravenel. They were now almost 2 days' ride from these events, at the mercy of these clansmen, while the workings of the border spun further out of control. The clan leader didn't want Laurent on his feet and strode forward, snapping an order. Laurent didn't comply. Roll credits. Sorry, Liv, you can't be that funny. Laurent didn't comply. Laurent answered him back in Vaskian, but for once in his life, Laurent got only 2 words out before the man simply did what most people wanted to do when speaking with Laurent. He hit him. It was the sort of blow that had sent Aymeric sprawling against a wall and then to the floor. Laurent staggered back a step, paused, then returned his glittering gaze to the man and said something deliberately and liltingly clear in impenetrable Vaskian dialect that caused several of the onlookers to double over with laughter, clutching each other's shoulders, while the man who had hit Laurent rounded on them and started shouting. It almost worked. The other men stopped laughing. They started shouting back. Attention shifted. Bows lowered. Bows lowered. Not all the bows. Damon had no doubt that, given a day or two, Laurent could have had these men at each other's throats. But they didn't have a day or two. Damon felt the moment when the tension threatened to burst into violence, felt that it did not have quite enough energy to push it over. They didn't have time for missed opportunities. Damon's questing gaze found Laurent's. If this was to be their only chance, they were going to have to make the attempt now, despite the unworkable odds, but Laurent, judging the odds and returning a different conclusion, minutely shook his head. Damon felt frustration twist in his stomach, but by that time it was already too late. The clan leader had stopped and swung all his attention back to Laurent, who stood alone and vulnerable, his pale hair marking him out despite the lack of light here in the dark space near the horses, away from the main gathering of the camp and its central fire. It was not going to be a single blow this time. Damon knew that, from the way that the clan leader approached. Laurent was about to get the beating of his life. A sharp order, and Laurent was restrained by 2 men, one at each shoulder, their arms interlocking around his arms, which remained tied behind his back. Laurent did not try to tear his shoulders from the grip of the men or wrench himself from their hands. He just waited for what was coming, his body taut in a hard grip. The clan leader stepped in close, too close to hit Laurent, close enough that he was breathing all over Laurent when he slid his hands slowly down over Laurent's body. Damon moved before he realized it, heard the sounds of impact and resistance, felt the burn in his veins. His faculties were obliterated by anger. He was not thinking about tactics. That man had laid hands on Laurent, and Damon was going to kill him. Really telling on myself with this pause here. When he came back to himself, more than one man was holding him down. His hands were still tied behind his back, but around him there was chaos and physical disruption, and 2 of the men were dead. One had been driven onto the point of another's blade. One had hit the ground and then had Damon's foot applied to his throat. No one was paying attention to Laurent now. Ooh. Oh, also, in case you're wondering why the arm is moving weird, my shoulder is tight again, so I'm trying to find positions that make it more comfortable. There are other things happening right now, but just so you think, why the heck is she sitting like this? That would be why. So we're just trying to That's what I forgot to do. I need to take ibuprofen at the break. Anyway, but it hadn't been enough. His hands were tied, and there were too many men. He could feel the iron grip of his captors on him now, and, against the strain of his arms and shoulders, the resistance of the rope that bound his wrists. In the moment that followed, muscles bunched and chest heaving, he understood what he had done. The Regent wanted Laurent dead. These men were different. They probably wanted Laurent alive until they no longer wanted him. This far south it was, as Laurent himself had insouciantly speculated, at least partly the blonde hair. None of that applied to Damon. There was a harsh to and fro of words in Vaskian, and Damon did not need to understand the dialect to understand the orders. Kill him. He was a fool. He had let this happen. He was going to die out here, in the middle of nowhere, and Castor's claim would be made true. He thought of Achielos, of the view from the palace out over the high white cliffs. He had really believed, throughout this whole drawn-out mess on the border, that he was going to make it home. He struggled. It did very little. His hands, after all, were tied, and the men were bringing all their force to bear on the task of holding him back. He heard the sound of a sword being unsheathed to his left. The edge of the blade touched the back of his neck, then lifted, and Laurent's voice cut across the scene in Vaskian. From one heartbeat to the next, Damon waited for the sword to descend. It didn't. There was no bite of metal. Damon's head stayed where it was, attached to his neck. In the ringing silence, Damon waited. It did not seem possible, at this point, that there existed any words that could better this situation, let alone a handful of words that could get the sword removed from his neck, get the leader to rescind his order, and gain Laurent a hint of approval from the clan. But that was, impossibly, what was happening. If Damon wondered dazedly what it was Laurent had said, he did not have to wonder long. The clan leader was so pleased by Laurent's words that he was inspired to draw close to Damon and translate. The words emerged in guttural, thickly accented Varishan. He says, "Fast death doesn't hurt," just before a fist was applied to Damon's stomach. That is indeed a good point, Laurent. That probably was the only thing you could have said. Really? In that moment? As unpleasant as that is? The only thing to buy someone time. Hey, that was a scene break. I don't know if I said that. That was a scene break. I was just checking to make sure that I had turned the microphone up. Damon's left side took the worst of it. Blunt, unimaginative pain. Struggling earned him a crack on the head with a club, which turned the camp wavy. He held hard to consciousness, which paid off. When brutalizing their prisoner began distracting the other men from their duties about camp, the clan leader ordered the business end of things to be taken elsewhere. 4 men dragged Damon up, then prodded him at sword point until the light from the campfire winked out of sight and the sound of the drums dropped away. They did not take any extraordinary precautions to secure him. They thought the ropes binding his hands were enough. They had not considered his size, or the fact that by now he was seriously annoyed, having long ago reached the threshold of what he would tolerate. That indeed, what he would tolerate in a camp of 50 men, with another captive's welfare to consider, was very different to what he would tolerate alone, with 4. Since Laurent had decided not to follow through on his own reckless gambit, it was going to be Damon's pleasure to escape the hard way. Getting free of the ropes was only a matter of slamming the man to his left into the incline and dragging the ropes down his trapped sword. Hands on the sword hilt, he drove it backwards into the man's stomach, which caused him to curl over, choking. Then he had freedom and a weapon. He used it, lifting his arm to knock the sword of his attacker out of the way, then punched it forward to run the man through. He felt it slice through leather and fleece, then muscle. He felt the weight of the man on his blade. It was an inefficient way to kill someone because it wasted precious seconds to withdraw the blade, but he had the time. The other 2 men were holding back now. He pulled the blade out. if he had had any doubts that these were the men who had attacked Terrassus, they were banished when the two men changed formation into one that was used to take advantage of Achillean's sword tactics. Damon's eyes narrowed. He let the man clutching his stomach stand up so that his opponents would feel confident with the odds of 3-on-1 and attack rather than run for the camp. Then he killed them with hard, brutal strokes and took the best sword and knife to replace his own. He took his time searching for weapons, cataloging his surroundings, and taking stock of his own physical condition. His left side was now a weakness, but functional. That Laurent was still trapped in the camp while he did so did not worry him unduly. Laurent was the one who had insisted on this mode of escaping. Laurent was no passive virgin trembling at the thought of his own deflowering. He frankly expected that Laurent, by this time, would have used his brain to pick off a few clansmen of his own. As it turned out, he had. That's another scene break. Whew! Damon, this is where my enthusiasm for competency comes in. But Damon being incredibly good at escaping things in the way that he is used to escaping things is really nice. I'm just saying, this is when I get into trouble, right? So obviously I have about 1.5 million ships, and I have collected them over decades at this point. And I have learned about myself that sure, I have plenty of ships. In a lot of them, even though I love both of the characters involved, and obviously, you know, I love both of them to a certain extent, but I almost always have a favorite, right? One that I particularly love, and then the other one that I find interesting, but not to the same feverish peak as, you know, the favorite, right? I know that I'm in trouble when it comes to a ship, when I find both of them equally fascinating, amazing, you know, sometimes hot, like whatever, like when I love them both equally, when they both hit that high point for me, that's when I'm deeply in trouble. That's when it gets really real. That's when I probably don't stop talking about them for a couple decades. And Damon and Laurent, as different as they are, fit that bill. They really, really do. Damon arrived just in time to witness chaos. It must have been like this for the villagers in Terrassus when the raiders hit it, a rain of death from out of the darkness, and then the sound of hooves. The men had no warning, but that was the way in clan warfare. One of the men near the campfire looked down to find an arrow in his chest. Another man toppled to his knees. Another arrow. And then without pause after the arrows came the riders. Damon felt the satisfying irony as this camp of men, these men who had raided and killed across the border, were overrun by riders from another clan. As Damon watched, the newcomers divided seamlessly, 5 riders to go through the camp, and 10 each on either side. At first they were dark, unidentifiable moving shapes. Then there was a sudden flare of light. 2 of the riders had snatched up half-burnt branches from the fire and dropped them on tents, whose skins burst into flame. Lit up, the scene showed that the newcomers were women, the traditional warriors of the clans, riding ponies that could leap like chamois and dart about in formations like fish in clear stream water. But the men were familiar with these tactics, being of the clans themselves. Instead of dissolving into panic and disorder, they only scrambled briefly before several of them peeled off and made hard for the rocks and the surrounding dark, slashing and searching to cut down the archers. Others made for the horses, and with a leap were astride. It was different to every kind of fighting that Damon knew. The vicious blade cuts were different, the horsemanship, the uneven ground, the twisting tactics, and the dark. This was clan warfare at night. Under the same conditions, Laurent's men would have been overrun in an instant. So too would an Achillean troop. The clans knew more about mountain fighting than anyone alive. He wasn't here to watch them. He had his own purpose. With his pale head, Laurent was easy to pick out. Laurent had found his way to the fringes of the camp, and while other people were doing his fighting for him, he was calmly looking about himself for a way to untie his hands. Damon emerged from cover, took a firm hold of him and spun him around. Then he pulled out the knife and cut his hands free. Laurent said, "What took you so long?" "You planned this," said Damon. He didn't know why it came out as a question. Of course Laurent had planned this. The second part did not come out like a question. You arranged a counterattack with the women, then came out here as bait to draw out the men. Grimly, if you knew we were going to be rescued. I thought evading that Achillean troop drove us too far out of our way, and that we'd miss our rendezvous with the women. He did hit me too, said Laurent. Once, said Damon, and swept up his sword in the way of the man coming towards them. The man, expecting a kill, was startled to find his slashing blow met. Then he was dead. Laurent withdrew the point of the knife from the man's ribcage and did not argue further, because by now the fighting was on them. Laurent, beside him, was percipient. Acquiring the fallen man's short clan sword, Laurent inserted himself at Damon's left, which, Damon noted without surprise, let Damon do all the heavy fighting. Until the moment when a clansman attacked from the left, and Damon, bracing himself to call hard on the muscles of his bruised side, found that Laurent was there, meeting the man's blade, dispatching him with efficient grace, and shoring up Damon's weak side. Damon, disconcerted, let him. Key phrase about this whole series: shoring up Damon's weak side. From that moment on, they fought side by side. The place Laurent had chosen to position them was not a random spot on the edge of the fighting. It was the northern path out of the camp, the same route along which Damon had been taken. If Laurent had been any other man, Damon might have suspected him of coming this way to find him. Because Laurent was Laurent, the reason was different. For this was the only way out of the camp that was not defended by women. Trying to flee, men came in ones and twos, charging towards them. Better for everyone if no men escaped to tell their tale, I read for a living, to the regent, and so they fought together, killing with efficient purpose. It worked until a man came galloping towards them on a horse. It was difficult to kill a galloping horse with a sword. It was more difficult to kill the man riding the horse, high up out of range. Damon, seeing Laurent in the horse's path, appraising the situation like a mathematical problem, took a handful of the fabric at the back of Laurent's jacket and pulled him hard out of the way. The rider was killed by a woman, also on horseback, riding hard after him. The man flopped forward in the saddle while his horse slowed, then stopped. Around them, the tents had burned down to almost nothing. But there was enough light to see that victory was emerging. Of the men in the camp, half were dead. The other half had surrendered. Surrendered wasn't the word. They had been subdued, one by one, and were being bound as prisoners. Moonlight and the last smoldering remnants of the fire. A new woman had arrived on horseback, flanked by 2 attendants, and was being led through the camp towards them. One of us needs to view the dead and the prisoners to make sure no one escaped, said Damon, watching her approach. Laurent said, I'll do it. Later. He felt Laurent's hand wrap around his bicep in a firm grip and exert a pull. Down, said Laurent. Damon went to his knees, and Laurent lay punctuating fingers on Damon's shoulder to keep him there. The clanswoman swung down from her stocky horse. She showed her status with a great cloak of fur that wrapped around her shoulders. She was older than the other women, by at least 30 years. Black-eyed and stony-faced, Damon recognized her. It was Helvik. The last time he had seen her, she had been enthroned on a dais of furs, giving orders. Her flinty voice was exactly as he remembered, although this time, when she spoke, it was in heavily accented Varetian. We will relight the fires. We camp here tonight. The men will be guarded. A good fight. Many captives. Laurent said, The clan leader is dead. He is dead. To Laurent, she said, You fight well. It's a shame you do not have the size to breed great warriors, but you are not malformed. Your woman may not be displeased. Then, in the spirit of benevolence, Your face is well balanced. She slapped him encouragingly on the back. You have very long eyelashes, like a cow. Come, we will sit together, drink, and eat meats. Your slave is virile. Later he will serve us at the coupling fire. Damon felt the tenderness in his left side with each breath, and in his arms, when he did not repress it, was the fine tremor that occurs in muscles that have been restrained in bindings for too long, or pushed for an extended period beyond their usual limitations. Laurent answered in a hard, unyielding voice. The slave lies in no bed but mine. Clocking me out of nowhere. Jesus Christ. You couple with men, in the Varetian style, said Halvik. Then he will be taken and prepared for you. He will be given good cuts of meat and hakesh, so that when he mounts you, his endurance will bring you great pleasure. You see, this is Vaskian hospitality. That is indeed Vaskian hospitality. Like, let's go Vaskian hospitality. Let's go. Shit. Didn't even break stride, didn't stutter, didn't stop, didn't think, didn't regroup. Just, oh, you lay with men? We'll have it prepped for you. We'll give him an aid to make it even better. Oh, 3 cheers for Vask. Damon braced himself, gathering his remaining strength for what was to follow, but almost to his surprise, he did not have his mouth prized open and hakesh poured immediately down his throat. He wasn't forced into anything. He was treated as a guest, or at least as the possession of a guest, to be buffed and polished and taken to where the guest would want him. That was to the other side of the camp, to be washed of the dirt that was an inevitable result of a day's ride, during which one has been thrown to the ground several times by one's captors, then killed several of them. The women flung buckets of water at him, then scrubbed him with brushes, then dried him briskly. Then they dressed him in a Vaskian man's loincloth, a single leather string tied around his hips, then between the legs, with a hanging panel in front that could be lifted to one side for convenience at the appropriate time, as one of the women helpfully demonstrated. He weathered the demonstration. By this time, the camp was cleared, and the newly pitched tents looked like softly glowing globes, the light from lamps inside turning the tent skins to warm gold. The prisoners were placed under guard, the campfire was relit, the dais erected. Damon was presented with food, generously and courteously, also to his surprise. He was under no illusion that he was going to be taken to the campfire to roll around with Laurent. If anything, he was going to be taken to the campfire to watch Laurent do some inventive sidestepping. But he wasn't taken to the campfire. He was taken to a low tent. The hakesh was poured into a jug and placed with a carved cup inside the tent for him to drink at his leisure. The woman lifted the flap of the tent with the same economic motion she had used on the loincloth. Laurent was not inside the tent. Laurent would, Damon was made to understand, join him later. Laurent had already done the sidestepping. It was a very small tent, long and low, the inside intimate, thick with furs, layers of chamois, and on the top fox fur, treated and softer than the underbelly of a rabbit. And it was hospitably equipped for men's pleasure. The foot of the tent held the jug of hakesh, a second jug of water, a hanging lamp, cloths, and 3 small stoppered bottles containing oils that were not for the lamp. Entering, Damon could sit, but with barely a foot to spare above his head. If he stood up, he would take the tent with him. Having nothing else to do, he lay down on the furs in his minimal garment. The furs were warm, and the tent was a cozy nook to lie with a partner, but alone it was hard not to think about where he was, and what might have happened today if things had fallen out differently. He let all the aches of his body settle, stretching out. His foot hit the tent hide with his knee still bent. He shifted onto a diagonal. Not that way either. On his side, he bumped the tent pole at his back. Looking around for somewhere to put his left leg, he let out a breath of amusement. Weary as he was, he could see the humor in this situation. Considering the size of the tent, it was lucky that Laurent was not going to be joining him until morning. He curled, found a position for all of his limbs, and let them grow heavy against the soft furs and cushions. And that was when... I tripped over my own excitement. And that was when the flap lifted on a golden head. Framed in the entry, Laurent had also been washed and dried and dressed. His skin was fresh, and he was wrapped in a Vaskian cloak of fur, like the one Halvik had worn. In the lamplight it looked like a rich garment that a prince might swathe himself in, on a throne. Damon pushed himself up on an elbow, and propped his head on his hand, his fingers in his hair. He saw that Laurent was looking at him, not watching him as he did sometimes, but looking at him, as a man might look at a carving that has caught his attention. Okay. Damon's eyes eventually. It's a load-bearing. Eventually. Laurent said, "Here's to Vaskian hospitality." Girl, what did I just say? It's a traditional garment. All the men wear them, Damon said, eyeing Laurent's fur cloak with curiosity. Laurent dropped the cloak from his shoulders. Beneath it, he wore some kind of Vaskian bedclothes, a tunic and pants of very fine white linen, with a series of loose ties in front. Mine has a little more fabric. Are you disappointed? I don't want to use the F word, but are we I can never remember how this part of the book exactly goes down. I've got to repeat that again, just to get a running start. Mine has a little more fabric. Are you disappointed? I would be, said Damon, rearranging his legs again, if the lamp weren't behind you. It arrested Lauren. Can't even pronounce his name anymore. It arrested Laurent's motion. In a pose with one knee on the furs and a palm too, just for a moment, before he stretched his body out alongside Damon's. Unlike Damon, he did not fully lie himself down on the furs, but sat, leaning his weight on his hands. Damon said, "Thank you for..." There was no delicate way of saying it, so he gestured generally to the inside of the tent. Ooh, French, hang on. Asserting, droit de seigneur. Close-ish. How inflamed are you? Stop it. I didn't drink the Hakash. I'm not sure that's quite what I asked, said Laurent. His voice had the same quality as his gaze. This is close quarters. Close enough to see your eyelashes, said Damon. It's lucky you do not have the size to breed great warriors. And then he stopped himself. This was the wrong mood. This was the mood if he were here with a warm, amenable partner, someone he could tease and pull in towards himself, not Laurent, chaste as an icicle. My size, said Laurent, is the usual. I am not made in miniature. It's a problem of scale, standing next to you. It was like being pleased by a thorn bush, feeling fond of every prickle. Another second and he was going to say something ridiculous like that. Ridiculous yet accurate, Damon. The soft fur had warmed with his skin, and he gazed up at Laurent, feeling languorous and comfortable. He knew that the corners of his mouth were curved up a little. After a slight pause, Laurent said, almost carefully, I realize that in my service you do not have a great deal of opportunity to pursue the usual avenues for release. If you need to avail yourself of the coupling fire... No, said Damon. I don't want a woman. The drums outside were a low, continuous throb. Laurent said, "Sit up." Sitting up meant taking up all of the extra space in the tent. He found himself looking down at Laurent, his eyes passing slowly over the delicate skin, the lamp-darkened blue eyes, the elegant curve of cheekbone, interrupted by a stray strand of blonde hair. He almost didn't notice when Laurent drew a cloth from his cloak, except that Laurent was holding it bunched in his hand like a poultice, and was looking at Damon's body as though he was planning to apply it with his own hands. "What are you?" he said. "Hold still," said Laurent, and lifted the cloth. A shock of cold, as something wet and freezing was pressed to his ribcage, just below his pectoral muscle. His abdominal muscles flinched at the contact. "Were you expecting a salve?" said Laurent. "They brought it for you from further up the slope." Ice. It was ice, wrapped in cloth, pressed steadily to the bruising on his left side. His ribcage rose and fell with his breath. Laurent held it firm. After the initial discomfort, Damon felt the ice start to draw out the heat of the bruising, spreading cool numbness, so that the tense muscles around it began to relax as the ice melted. Laurent said, "I told the clansmen to make it hurt." Damon said, "It saved my life." After a pause, Laurent said, "Since I can't throw a sword." Damon took hold of the cloth himself as Laurent withdrew. Laurent said, "You know by now that these were the same men who attacked Terrassus. Halvik and her riders will escort 10 of them with us to Berteau, and from there to Ravenel, where I will use them to try to lever this border deadlock open." Adding, almost apologetically, "Halvik receives the rest of the men, and all of the weapons." He followed that thought to its conclusion. "She has agreed to use the weapons raiding Achielos to the south, rather than anywhere inside your borders." "Something like that." "And at Ravenel, you mean to expose your uncle as the sponsor of the attack?" "Yes," said Laurent. "I think things are about to become very dangerous." "About to become," said Damon. "Tuar is the one who needs convincing. If you hated Achielos," said Laurent, "more than anything, and you'd been given one chance to hit them as never before, what would stop you? Why would you put down your sword?" "I wouldn't," said Damon. "Maybe if I was angrier at someone else." Laurent let out a strange breath, then looked away. Outside, the drums were ceaseless, but seemed like something distant, apart from the quiet space in the tent. "This is not the way I planned to spend the eve of war," said Laurent. "With me in your bed." "And in my confidences," said Laurent. Laurent said it as his eyes returned to Damon's. For a moment it seemed as if he would say something more, but instead of speaking he pushed the cloak out of the way and lay himself down. The shift in position signaled the end of the conversation, though Laurent drew his wrist to his forehead, as though still locked in thought. He said, "Tomorrow will be a long day, 30 miles of mountains with prisoners. We should sleep." The ice had melted, leaving wet cloth. Damon removed it. There were droplets of water on the planes of his torso. He wiped them off, then tossed the cloth to the far end of the tent. He was aware that Laurent was looking at him again, even as Laurent lay relaxed, his pale hair mingling with the soft fur, a line of very fine skin visible all the way down the loose opening of his Vaskian bedclothes. But after a moment, Laurent turned his eyes elsewhere, and then closed them, and they both made their way to sleep. That's the end of the chapter. Did I remember any of that? No. So, just gonna take a second to recover. I said that was the end of the chapter, right? We're on page, what are numbers? 233 for, chapter 14, it is, in my humble opinion, it is the exact correct decision to have these two embroiled in an inherently sexual context. One is the higher ranked, the other one is very specifically the bed slave, and that requires all of these personal, intimate, and sometimes sexually presumed situations, and have them not do anything. It is such a good slow burn tease that I think in the hands of a lesser writer would have given in a long time ago. But instead, she's choosing to drive us all slowly insane. Because also, wouldn't make sense. Wouldn't make sense for it to have happened at any point in this scene or beforehand. Wouldn't have made sense. Not at all. Which is why I say, in the hands of a lesser writer. Chapter 14. Your Highness! Jord, on horseback, was hailing them. He was accompanied by 2 other riders with torches, lighting up the dark. We'd sent out scouts to find you. Call them back, said Laurent. Jord reined in, nodding. 30 miles of mountains with prisoners. It had taken 12 hours, a slow, plodding trip with the men swaying and struggling in the saddles, occasionally clubbed into stupefied obedience by the women. Damon remembered what that felt like. It had been a long day with an abstemious beginning. He had woken stiff, with his body protesting any change in position. Beside him, a pile of markedly empty furs. No, Laurent. All signs of recent occupancy had been a handspan away from his own body, suggesting a night spent in close but not transgressive proximity. Some kind of self-preservation had apparently prevented Damon from rolling inward during the night, from throwing his arm over Laurent's torso and drawing them together to make the small tent seem larger than it was. Yeah. Tent size would have been the motivation there. As a result, Damon was in possession of all his limbs, and even had his clothing restored to him. Thank you, Laurent. Nosing down steep declines on horseback was not something he preferred to do in a loincloth. The day's ride that had followed had been almost unsettlingly eventful. They had reached gentler slopes by mid-afternoon, and, for once, there had been no ambushes or interruptions. The spreading rise and fall of the hillside had been quiet, stretching out to the south and the west, the only break in its peace the unlikeliness of their own procession. Laurent riding at the head of a band of Vaskian women on shaggy ponies, escorting his 10 prisoners, roped and tied, and lashed to their horses. Now it was nightfall, and the horses were exhausted, dropping their necks, some of them, and the prisoners had long since stopped struggling. Jord fell into formation beside them. Berteau is cleared, Jord was saying. Lord Toir's men rode back to Ravenel this morning. We chose to stay on and wait. There has been no word from any direction. The border or the forts or yourself. The men were starting to get twitchy. They'll be glad of your return. I want them ready to ride out at dawn, said Laurent. Jord nodded, then glanced helplessly at the band and its prisoners. Yes, they are the men who caused these border attacks, said Laurent, answering the question that had not been asked. They don't look Achillean, said Jord. No, said Laurent. Jord nodded grimly, and they crested the last rise to see the shadows and the points of light of the nighttime camp. That's a scene break. The embroidery came later, in the retelling, as the story was told again and again by the men, taking on its own character as it passed over camp. The prince had ridden out, with only 1 soldier. Deep in the mountains, he had chased down the rats responsible for these killings, had ripped them out of their hiding holes and fought them, 30 to 1 at least, had brought them back thrashed, lashed, and subdued. That was their prince for you, a twisty, vicious fiend who you should never, ever cross, unless you wanted your gullet handed to you on a platter. Why, he once rode a horse to death just to beat Torvald of Patras to the mark. In the men's eyes, the feat was reflected as the wild, impossible thing it was, their prince vanishing for 2 days, then appearing out of the night with a sack full of prisoners thrown over his shoulder, tossing them at the feet of the troop and saying, "You wanted them, here they are." "You took a beating," said Pascal, later. 30-1 at least, said Damon. Pascal snorted. Then he said, It's a good thing you're doing, staying with him when you have no love for this country." Instead of accepting the invitations to the campfire, Damon found himself walking the edges of the camp. Behind him, the voices grew distant. Rocher saying something about blonde hair and temperament, Lazare reliving Laurent's duel with Gauvard. Berteau looked very different to the last time Damon had seen it. Instead of piles of burning wood, there was cleared ground. The half-open pits were filled in. The broken spears and the signs of fighting were gone. Dwellings that were damaged beyond repair had been neatly stripped down for materials. The camp itself was a series of ordered geometric tents pitched west of the village. Sloping canvas was pulled taut in rigorous lines, and at the far end of the camp stood Laurent's tent, which had been prepared for him despite his absence. Between the ranked columns, men proceeded in friendlier, less rigid paths to and from the campfires. It was not a victory. Not yet. They were still a day's ride out from Ravenel. That meant their absence would be 4 days at least. Assuming good horses and good roads, the regent's messenger would certainly have arrived by then, beating them to Ravenel by at least a day. It had probably happened this morning, while Damon was waking to an empty tent, the messenger pounding into the fort's dwarfing open courtyard, being quickly ushered into the great hall, and all the lords of Ravenel gathering around to hear his message. This in the absence of the wastrel prince, who had flitted off during a crisis, and had not returned as he had promised, missing the moment when he most needed to be taken seriously, to forge decisions and shape events. In that sense, they were already too late. But today's unlikely procession through the hills was planning on a level he had not previously attributed to Laurent. Laurent had negotiated the counterstrike with Halvik the evening before hearing the first news of attacks on his border. The messages and bribes that had flowed from Laurent to Halvik's clan had begun days earlier than that. Laurent must have guessed the way in which his uncle would trigger a border conflict, and begun his own preparations to counter it, well in advance. Damon remembered the first night at Chastillon, the sloppy work, the fights, the poor standard of soldiering. The regent had thrown his nephew a chaotic rabble of men, and Laurent had stamped it into ordered lines, had given him an ungovernable captain, and Laurent had vanquished him, had unleashed a dangerous force on the border, and Laurent had brought it back, neutered and strapped down. Check, check, and check, as each element of disorder was brought under Laurent's monumental control. Heart, body, and mind, these men belonged to the prince. Their hard work and discipline were evident in every part of the camp and the surrounding village. Damon let the cool evening air pass over him, and let himself feel down to his bones the virtuosity of this journey he was a part of, and just how far they had come. Scene break. And in the cool evening air, he let himself face it, in a way he had not allowed himself to face it before. Home. Home lay right on the other side of Ravenel. The moment when he would leave Vert was approaching. Like his own heartbeat, he knew the steps in his return. Escape would take him across the border to Achielos, where any blacksmith would willingly take the gold from his wrists and neck. The gold would buy him access to his northern supporters, the strongest of whom was Nicandros, whose implacable animosity towards Castor was of long standing. Then he would have the force to ride south. He looked at Laurent's tent of silks, the pennants unfurled in the breeze, their starbursts undulating. The distant voices of the men swelled briefly, then dropped away. It would not be like this. It would be a systematic campaign moving southwards towards Ios, building on the support he had from the Cairoi factions. He would not be stealing out of camp at night to spin mad plans, to dress in unfamiliar clothes and forge alliances with rogue clans, or to fight alongside pony-riding warriors, capturing bandits improbably in the mountains. It would not be like this again. It's another scene break. Laurent was seated with an elbow on the table, studying a map, when Damon came into the tent. Braziers warmed the space, lamps illuminated with the gleam of flame light. "One more night," said Damon. "Keep the prisoners alive, keep the women on side, keep my men from the women," said Laurent, as though reciting from a checklist. "Come over here and talk geography." He came as he was bid, and took a seat opposite Laurent across the map. Laurent wished to discuss, again and in meticulous detail, every inch of land between here and Ravenel, as well as along the northeastern section of border. Damon called on all he knew, and they talked for several hours, drawing comparisons in quality of slopes and ground with the country they had just ridden through. The camp outside had fallen into the quiet of deep night when Laurent finally detached his attention from the map. I accidentally turned 2 pages, and said, "All right, if we do not stop now, we will go all night." Damon watched him rise. Laurent did not tend to show any of the usual outward signs of fatigue. The control that he asserted and maintained over the troop was an extension of the control with which he ruled himself. A few tells existed. The words, perhaps. Laurent's jaw was bruised. Ooh, damn, word. A sphaleritic print where the clan leader had struck him. Laurent had the kind of fine, overbred skin that bruised like soft fruit to the touch. Lamplight played over Laurent as he absently lifted his hand to his wrist to begin unfastening the lacing there. "Here," said Damon. "Let me." Habit. Damon rose himself and stepped in, let his fingers make work with the laces at Laurent's wrists, then at his back. The jacket split open like a pea shell, and he pushed it off. Released from the weight of the jacket, Laurent rolled his shoulder, as he did sometimes after a long day in the saddle. Instinctively, Damon brought his hand up to squeeze Laurent's shoulder gently, and then stopped. Laurent went very still, as Damon became aware of what he had just done, and that his grip was still on Laurent's shoulder. He felt the locked muscles like hard wood beneath his hand. "Stiff?" said Damon casually. "A little," said Laurent, after a moment in which Damon's heart knocked twice against the inside of his chest. Damon brought his other hand up to Laurent's other shoulder, more to keep Laurent from turning unexpectedly or dislodging him. He stood behind Laurent and kept his matter-of-fact grip as impersonal as he could make it. Laurent said, "The soldiers in Castor's army are trained in massage?" "No," said Damon, "but I think the rudiments are easy to master, if you like." He applied a gentle pressure with his thumbs. He said, "You brought me ice last night." "This," said Laurent, "is a little more—" It was a word of sharp points. "Intimate," he said, "than ice." "Too intimate," Damon said. Slowly, he was kneading Laurent's shoulders. He did not usually think of himself as someone with suicidal impulses. Laurent did not relax at all, just stood unmoving. And then, at the apsis of his thumbs, a muscle shifted beneath pressure, unlocking a sequence all the way down Laurent's back. Laurent said, unwillingly, There. Here." "Yes." He felt Laurent subtly give himself up to his hands, yet as with a man closing his eyes on the edge of a cliff, it was an act of continuous tension, not surrender. Instinct kept Damon's movements undeviating, utilitarian. He breathed carefully. He could feel the entire framework of Laurent's back, the curvature of his shoulder blades, and between them, under Damon's hands, the unyielding planes that, when Laurent used a sword, would be working muscle. The slow kneading continued. There was another shift in Laurent's body, another slight, half-repressed reaction. "Like this?" "Yes." Laurent's head had dropped forward a little. Damon had no idea what he was doing. He was distantly aware that he had had his hands on Laurent's body once before and couldn't believe it, because it felt so impossible now, yet that moment felt connected to this one, even if only in contrast. His current caution against the unguarded way he had let his hands slide down over Laurent's wet skin. Damon looked downwards and saw the way that the white fabric shifted slightly under his thumbs. Laurent's shirt hung on his body, a containing layer. Then Damon's eyes traveled up along the balanced nape to a wick of golden hair tucked behind an ear. Damon let his hands move only enough to seek out new muscles to unknot. In Laurent's body, always, that flickering tension. "Is it so hard to relax?" said Damon, quietly. "You only have to walk outside to see what you've accomplished. Those men are yours." He didn't pay attention to the signs, the slight stiffening. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you've done more than anyone could. That's enough," said Laurent, pushing himself away unexpectedly. When Laurent turned to face him, his eyes were dark. His lips were parted uncertainly. He had lifted his hand to his own shoulder as though chasing a ghost touch there. He did not look exactly relaxed, but the movement did look a little easier. As if realizing that, Laurent said, almost awkwardly, "Thank you." And then, in wry acknowledgement, "Getting tied up leaves an impression. I didn't realize being captured was so uncomfortable." "Well, it is." The words sounded close to normal. "I promise I'll never tie you to the back of a horse," said Laurent. There was a pause in which Laurent's mordant gaze was on him. "That's right. I'm still captured." "Your eyes say for now," Laurent said. "Your eyes have always said for now." And then, "If you were a pet, I would have gifted you enough by now to buy out your contract, many times over." We don't have time to unpack all that. "I'd still be here," said Damon, "with you. I told you that I would see this border dispute through to its finish. Do you think I'd go back on my word?" "No," said Laurent, almost as if he was realizing it for the first time. "I don't think you would. But I know you don't like it. I remember how much it maddened you in the palace to be bound and powerless. I felt yesterday how badly you wanted to hit someone." Damon found he'd moved without realizing it, his fingers lifting to touch the bruised edge of Laurent's jaw. He said, "The man who did this to you." The words just came out. The warmth of skin under his fingers in that moment took all his attention. Before he became aware that Laurent had jerked back and was staring at him, blue eyes huge with pupil. Damon was suddenly aware of how out of control he felt, and called violently on his faculties to try to put a stop to this. "I'm sorry. I know better than that." He forced himself a step back, too. He said, "I think I had better report to the watch. I can take a shift tonight." He turned to leave and made it all the way to the tent's entrance. Laurent's voice caught him with his hand parting the canvas. "No, wait." Damon stopped and turned. Laurent's gaze was edged with indecipherable emotion, and his jaw was set at a new angle. The silence stretched out for such a long time that the words, when they came, were a shock. "What Gaywatch said about my brother and I, it wasn't true." "I never thought it was," said Damon, uneasily. "I mean that whatever taint exists in my family, Auguste was free of it." "Taint." "I wanted to tell you that because you," said Laurent, as though he was forcing the words out, "you remind me of him. He was the best man I have ever known. You deserve to know that, as you deserve at least a fair..." In Arl, I treated you with malice and cruelty. I will not insult you by attempting to atone for deeds with words, but I would not treat you that way again. I was angry. Angry, that isn't the word. It was bitten off. A jagged silence followed. Laurent said steadily, I have your oath that you will see this border skirmish through to its end. Then you have mine. Stay with me until this thing is done, and I will take off the cuffs and the collar. I will release you willingly. We can face each other as free men. Whatever is to fall out between us can do so then. Damon stared at him. He felt a strange pressure in his chest. The lamplight appeared to wave and flicker. It's not a trick, said Laurent. You'd let me go, said Damon. This time it was Laurent who was silent, gazing back at him. Damon said, And until then? Until then you are my slave, and I am your prince, and that is how it is between us. Then, with a return to his more usual tone, And you don't need to take watch, said Laurent. You sleep prudently. Damon searched his face, but found nothing in it that he could read, which, he supposed, as he lifted his hands to the laces of his own jacket, was typical. That's the end of the chapter. Book 2 is impressive because it's the turning of the boat, so to speak. You have everything set out in one direction in the first book. And then over the course of the second book, it's the baffling thing. It's like all of a sudden the direction is moved and shifted over time into an entirely other direction. And you just sit there and wonder, how did we get here? How we were there for every step of the way, and yet, how did we get here? It's such an incredible feeling. We are on chapter 15. We are also overdue for the break, so I will keep it as short as possible. I actually don't need to do very much. Page, I left numbers behind me so long ago. 247 for chapter 15, which we will get to when we come back after the break. And we all maybe go breathe for a little bit before we continue. All right. Okay. Sure. Let me get the break room situated. And, I'll be back in a few minutes. And we're back. Thank you guys for the ibuprofen reminder, because I absolutely would have entirely forgotten. In fact, I did entirely forget until I saw several people hollering at me about ibuprofen. So thank you. Because, yeah, that would have entirely left me. That would not have happened without y'all. So thank you. Thank you so much. So, we are on chapter 15. Page, you know, I really love the look of having no page numbers on a chapter page, but, you know, as someone who's reading these in front of people, having to remind myself by turning the page and flipping all the way back, not the best, but it looks so good though. So, like, how can I fault them? It's page 247 for chapter 15. Long before dawn, he was awake. There were duties to be performed inside the tent and out of it. Before he got up and performed them, he lay for a long time with an open arm on his forehead, his shirt strewn open, the bedding on his pallet loose around him, staring up at long hanging folds of twilled silk. Outside, when he went outside, any signs of activity were not yet those of waking, but an extension of work that continued in a camp throughout the night. Men tending to torches and campfires, the silent pacing of the watch, scouts dismounting and reporting to their night commanders, who were also awake. For himself, he began his early work readying Laurent's armor, laying out each piece, pulling hard on each strap, checking each rivet. The intricate worked metal with its fluted edges and decorative borders was as familiar to him as his own. He had learned how to handle Varetian armor. He turned to the inventory he must make of weapons, check each blade was immaculately free of nicks and marks, check the hilts and pommels were smooth of anything that could catch or impede, check that there was no change in balance that could even for a moment disconcert the man wielding it. Returning, he found the tent empty. Laurent had left on some early business. The camp around him was still dark-shrouded, with closed tents in blissful sleep. The men, he knew, were anticipating riding into Ravenel to the same kind of approbation with which Laurent had ridden into their own camp. Cheers for the men who brought in the offenders on a rope. Truthfully, Damon found it difficult to imagine how exactly Laurent would use his prisoners to coax Lord Tuar down from a fight. Laurent was good at talking, but men like Tuar had very little patience for talking. Even if the Varetian border lords could be persuaded, Nicandrus's commanders were rattling their swords, more than rattling them. There had been attacks on both sides of the border, and Laurent had seen the movements of the Achielan forces with his own eyes, as Damon had. A month ago he would have expected, much like the men, that the prisoners would be dragged before Tuar, the truth loudly proclaimed, the regent's dealings exposed before all. Now, Damon could just as easily envisage Laurent denying any knowledge of the culprit, letting Tuar find his own way to the regent, could practically see Laurent's blue eyes' feigned concern for the truth, followed by his blue-eyed feigned surprise when it was revealed. The search itself would work as a delaying tactic, would draw things out, would take its own time. Deception and double-dealing, it seemed sufficiently Varetian. He even thought if Laurent held to his purpose, it could be done. And then, the exposure of the regent culminating in the night Laurent came to him and freed him with his own hands. Also, growth. He's learning! He's picked it up. See? Not an idiot. Just a fish out of water. Needed to catch on. Needed to see everything in action so he could learn the ropes of an entirely foreign culture. Damon found himself past the edges of the tent rows, with Berteau forever silent behind him. Soon the dawn would come, the first sounds from the throats of birds, the sky growing lighter, the stars fading as the sun came up. He closed his eyes, feeling his chest rise and fall. Because it was impossible, he allowed himself to imagine, just once, what it would be like to face Laurent as a man. If there had been no animosity between their countries, Laurent journeying to Achielos as part of an embassy, Damon's attention superficially caught by the blonde hair. They'd attend banquets and sports together, and Laurent, he had seen Laurent with those he cultivated, charming and edged without being lethal. And he was honest enough with himself to admit that if he had encountered Laurent in that mode, all golden lashes and needling remarks, he might well have found himself in some danger. Yeah, under those circumstances. Not like he's in danger now. His eyes came open. He heard the sound of riders. Following the sound, he pushed through the trees and found himself right on the edge of the Vaskian camp. 2 women riders had just pounded in on lathered horses, and another was leaving. He remembered that Laurent had spent some time in negotiations and dealings with the Vaskians last night. He remembered that no men were supposed to come here, just as a spear point appeared in his path, held steady. He raised his hands in a surrendering gesture. The woman holding the spear didn't run him through with it. Instead, she gave him a long, speculative look, then gestured him forward. Spear at his back, he came into the camp. Unlike Laurent's camp, the Vaskian camp was active. The women were already awake and were seeing to the business of untying their 14 prisoners from their nighttime bonds and retying them for the coming day. And something else was occupying their attention. Damon saw that he was being taken towards Laurent, deep in dialogue with the 2 riders who had dismounted and were standing beside their exhausted horses. When Laurent saw him, he concluded his business and approached. The woman with the spear had vanished. Laurent said, "I'm afraid you don't have time." The tone was limpid. Damon said, "Thank you, but I came because I heard the horses." Laurent said, Lazar said he came because he took a wrong turning." Ha! There was a pause, in which Damon discarded several replies. Eventually, matching Laurent's tone, "I see. You prefer privacy?" "I couldn't if I wanted to. A batch of blonde Vaskians really would get me disinherited. I've never," said Laurent, "with a woman." "It's very pleasurable." "You prefer it?" "For the most part." Auguste preferred women. He told me I would grow into it. I told him that he could get heirs and I would read books. I was 9? 10? I thought I was already grown up. The hazards of overconfidence. On the verge of a reply, Damon stopped. That Laurent could talk endlessly like this, he knew. It wasn't always apparent what was behind the talking, but sometimes it was. Damon said, "You can rest easy. You are ready to face Lord Tuar." He watched Laurent stop. The light was dark blue now rather than pitch, and growing lighter. He could make out Laurent's fair hair, though not his face. Damon found there was something that, for a long time, he had wanted to ask. "I don't understand how your uncle has backed you this far into a corner. You can outplay him. I've seen you do it." Laurent said, "Maybe it seems that I can outplay him now, but this game began when I was younger." Just 1 second. Oh. They reached the camp. The first calls came from the tent lines. The troop in the gray light. Laurent had been 14 at Marlis. Or Damon moved months around in his head. The battle had been waged in early spring. Laurent reached his maturity in late spring, so no, younger. 13, on the cusp of 14. He tried to picture Laurent at 13 and experienced a total failure of imagination. It was just as impossible to imagine him fighting in battle at that age as it was to imagine him trailing around after an older brother he adored. It was impossible to imagine him adoring anyone. The tents came down, the men swung up into their saddles. Damon's view was of a straight back those years ago. Auguste, the one honorable man on a treacherous his tent in good faith. He had offered the Varetians fair terms, surrender their lands, and live. The herald had spat on the ground and said, Ver will never surrender to Achielos, even as the first sounds of a Varetian attack had come from outside. Attack under the guise of parley, the ultimate affront to honor, with kings on the field. You fight them, his father had said. You don't trust them. His father had been right, and his father had been ready. Variscians were cowards and deceivers. They should have scattered when their duplicitous attack met the full force of the Achaean army, but for some reason they hadn't fallen at the first sign of a real fight. They had stood firm and shown mettle, and for hour upon hour they had fought, until the Achaean lines had begun to slip and falter. And their general wasn't the king. It was the 25-year-old prince, holding the field. Father, I can beat him, he'd said. Then go, his father had said, and bring us back victory. Further context for that. Because previously... Oh, sorry. I'll get to the sound. Before I say what I was going to say. Hang on. Why are we... One moment, please. Let's try this again. How is that? Is that better? Is that worse? Is that largely the same? Better? Fantastic. It went in and out for a minute there? Okay. I don't know, because this is a brand new cord for this microphone, because you have to replace the cord every so often. So maybe the mic is just having an issue, which we don't want to think about. My least favorite aspect of making stuff is sound. So we're not even going to talk about it. That was a scene break that gave, and before that gave greater context too. Because before we had only heard the direct quote of Damon telling his father, "Father, I can beat him," and his father saying, "Go bring us back victory." Before we only had that. Now that moment's been built out a little bit. It's kind of been mentioned here and there, but I think this was the first kind of clear, uninterrupted moment and context around what exactly had happened and why. As I bumped the mic, that was my fault. The field was called Hellay, and Damon knew it was a half-inch of a familiar map, studied in lamplight across from a bent golden head. Discussing the quality of the ground here with Laurent last night, he had said, "It has not been a harsh summer. It will be grass fields, gentle for riders if we need to depart from the road." It turned out to be true. The grass was thick and soft on either side of them. Hills rolled out before them, flowing one into another, and there were hills also to the east. The sun climbed the sky. They had ridden from a pre-dawn departure, but by the time they reached Hellay, there was plenty of light to differentiate rise from flat, grass from sky, sky from what lay under it. The sun was shining down on them when the crest of the southern hill detached itself, a moving line that thickened and began to glint with silver and red. Damon, riding at the head of the column, reined in to one side, and Laurent beside him did the same, his eyes never leaving the southern hill. The line was no longer a line. It was shapes, recognizable shapes, and George was calling for a troop-wide halt. Red. Red, the color of the Regency, scrawled over with the iconography of the border forts, growing, fluttering. These were the banners of Ravenel. Not only the banners, but men and riders, flowing over the hilltop like wine from an overfull cup, staining and darkening its slopes, and spreading. How absolutely dare she? By now, columns were visible. It was possible to roughly estimate numbers, 500 or 600 riders, 2 lots of 150-man infantry columns. Judging from what Damon had seen of the lodgings at the fort, this was in fact Ravenel's full contingent of horse, and a lesser but substantial portion of its infantry. His own horse moved skittishly under him. In the next moment, it seemed, the slopes to their right also grew figures, much closer, close enough to recognize the shape and livery of the men. It was the detachment that Tuar had sent to Briteau, who had, a day ago, departed. Not gone, but here, waiting. Add another 200 to the number. Damon could feel the nervous tension of the men behind him, surrounded by colors that half of them down to their bones distrusted, and outnumbered 10-1. Ravenel's forces on the hill began to split into a widening V shape. "They're moving to flank us. Have they mistaken us for an enemy troop?" said Jord, confused. "No," said Laurent. "There is still a path open to us, to the north," said Damon. "No," said Laurent. A parcel of men detached itself from Ravenel's main column and began making right for them. "You two," said Laurent, and dug his heels into his horse. Damon and Jord followed, and they rode out over the long fields of grass to meet Lord Tuar and his men. In form and protocols, from the beginning, it was wrong. It happened sometimes between two forces that there was some parley between messengers or a meeting between principals for final discussion of conditions or posturing before a fight. Galloping across the field, Damon felt down to his bones unease at the assertion of wartime arrangements, made worse by the size of the party they rode to meet and the men it contained. Laurent reined in. The party was led by Lord Tuar, beside him Councillor Guillaume, and Enguerrand, the captain. Behind him there were 12 mounted soldiers. "Lord Tuar," said Laurent. There was no preamble. "You have seen our forces. You will come with us." Laurent said, "I take it that since our last meeting you have received word from my uncle." Lord Tuar said nothing, as impassive as the cloaked, armored riders behind him, so that it was Laurent who, uncharacteristically, had to break the silence and speak. Laurent said, "Come with you to what purpose?" Lord Tuar's scarred face was cold with contempt. "We know you have paid bribes to Vaskian raiders. We know you are in thrall to the Achiellan, and that you have conspired with Vask to weaken your country with raids and border attacks. The good village of Briteau fell to one such raid. At Ravenel you will be tried and executed for treason." "Treason," said Laurent. "Can you deny that you have under your protection the men responsible for the attacks, and that you have coached them in an attempt to throw blame onto your uncle?" The words fell like the blow from an axe. "You can outplay him," Damon had said. But it had been long weeks since he had faced the power of the regent. It occurred to him, chillingly, that the captured men could indeed have been coached for this moment, just not by Laurent. Laurent, who had therefore brought Tuar the very rope that would hang him. "I can deny anything I like," said Laurent, "in the absence of proof." "He has proof. He has my testimony. I saw everything." A rider pushed out intrusively from behind the others, shoving back the hood of his cloak as he spoke. He looked different in an aristocrat's armor, with his dark curls primped and brushed, but the pretty mouth was familiar, like the antagonistic voice and the bellicose look in his eyes. It was Aymeric. Reality tilted. 100 innocuous moments showing themselves in a different light. As understanding came like a cold weight to Damon's stomach, Laurent was already moving, not to make some kind of polished retort, but wrenching his horse's head around, planting his mount in front of Jord's and saying, "Go back to the troop. Now." Jord's skin was blanched, as though he had just suffered a blow from a sword. Aymeric watched with his chin up, but gave Jord no particular attention. Jord's face was stripped raw with betrayal and stricken guilt, as he dragged his gaze from Aymeric and met Laurent's hard, unrelenting eyes. Guilt, a breach of faith that cut to the heart of their troop. How long had Aymeric been missing? And how long, out of misplaced loyalty, had Jord been covering up for him? Damon had always thought Jord a good captain, and he was still in that moment. White-faced, Jord made no excuses, and demanded none from Aymeric, but did as he was ordered, in silence. And then Laurent was alone, with only his slave beside him, and Damon felt the presence of every sword edge, every arrow tip, every soldier arrayed on the hill, and of Laurent, who lifted his cold blue eyes to Aymeric as if those things didn't exist. Laurent said, "You have me as an enemy for that. You are not going to enjoy the experience." Aymeric said, "You go to bed with Achielans. You let them fuck you." "Like you let Jord fuck you," said Laurent. "Except that you really let him fuck you. Did your father tell you to do that, or was it your own inspired addition?" "I don't betray my family. I'm not like you," said Aymeric. "You hate your uncle. You had unnatural feelings for your brother." At 13, from his frigid blue eyes to the tips of his polished boots, Laurent could not have looked less capable of feelings for anyone. "Apparently I was even more precocious than you." This seemed to infuriate Aymeric further. "You thought you were getting away with everything. I wanted to laugh in your face. I would have if it hadn't turned my stomach to serve under you." Lord Tuar said, "You will come with us willingly, or you will come after we have subjugated your men. You have a choice." Laurent was silent at first. His eyes passed over the arrayed troops, the contingent of horse flanking him on two sides, and the full complement of infantry, against which his own small band, their numbers never meant for waged battle. A trial, pitting his word against Aymeric's, would be a mockery, for among these men Laurent had no good name with which to defend himself. He was in the hands of his uncle's faction. In Arles, it would be worse, the regent himself muddying Laurent's reputation. Coward, no accomplishments, unfit for the throne. He was not going to ask his men to die for him. Damon knew that, as he knew, with a feeling like pain in his chest, that they would if he asked them. This rabble of men, who not long ago had been divided, shiftless, and disloyal, would fight to the death for their prince if he asked them. "If I submit to your soldiers, and give myself up to my uncle's justice," said Laurent, "what happens to my men?" "Your crimes are not theirs. Having committed no wrongs except loyalty, they will be given their freedom and their lives. They will be disbanded, and the women will be escorted to the Vascian border. The slave will be executed, of course." "Of course," said Laurent. Councillor Guillaume spoke. "Your uncle would never say this to you," he said, reining in beside his son Aymeric. "So I will. Out of loyalty to your father and your brother, your uncle has treated you with leniency you never deserved. You have repaid him with scorn and contempt, with negligence in your duties, and with wanton disregard for the shame you bring to your family. That your selfish nature has led you to treason does not surprise me, but how could you betray your uncle's trust after the kindness that he has lavished on you?" "Uncle's immoderate kindness," said Laurent. "I promise you, it was easy." Guillaume said, "You show no remorse at all." "Speaking of negligence," said Laurent. He lifted his hand. A long way behind him, two Vascian women detached themselves from his troop and began to ride forward. Enguerrand made a movement of concern, but Tuar motioned him back. Two women would hardly make a difference here, one way or the other. At the halfway mark of their approach, you could see that one of the women's saddles was lumped, and then you could see what it was lumped with. "I have something of yours. I chide you on your carelessness, but I've just had a lesson in the ways that the detritus of a troop can slip from one camp to another." Laurent said something in Vascian. The woman dumped the bundle from her horse onto the dirt, as one shaking unwanted contents from a pack. It was a man, brown-haired and lashed at the wrists and ankles like a boar to a pole after a hunt. His face was caked in dirt, except near the temple, where his hair was clumped with dried blood. He wasn't a clansman. Damon remembered the Vaskian camp. There were 14 prisoners today, when yesterday there had been 10. He looked sharply at Laurent. "If you think," said Guillaume, "that a fumbling final play with a hostage will stop or slow us from delivering to you the justice that you deserve, you are mistaken." Enguerrand was saying, "It's one of our scouts." "It's 4 of your scouts," said Laurent. One of the soldiers leapt down from his horse and went down on one armored knee beside the prisoner, as Thouars, frowning at Enguerrand, said, "The reports are delayed." "From the east. It's not unusual when the terrain is this broad," said Enguerrand. The soldier sliced open the bindings on the prisoner's hands and feet, and as he pulled at the gag, the prisoner lurched into a sitting position with the stupefied movements of a man fresh out of hard bindings. Thick-tongued. "My lord, a force of men to the east, riding to intercept you at Hellay." "This is Hellay," said Councillor Guillaume, with sharp impatience, as Captain Enguerrand looked at Laurent with a different expression. "What force?" Aymeric's sudden voice was thin and edged, and Damon remembered a chase across a rooftop, dropping laundry on the men below while the sky above wheeled with stars. "Your rabble of clan alliances or Achiellan mercenaries, no doubt." Remembered a bearded messenger falling to his knees in an inn-room. "You'd like that, wouldn't you?" said Laurent. Remembered Laurent murmuring intimately to Torvald on a perfumed balcony, gifting him with a king's ransom and slaves. The scout was saying, carrying the prince's banners alongside the yellow of Patras. An ear-splitting note from the horn of one of the Vaskian women drew a returning sound, like an echo, a distant, mournful note that rang out once and then again and again from the east. And cresting the sprawling eastern hill, the banners appeared, along with all the glinting weapons and livery of an army. Alone of all the men, Laurent did not lift his eyes to the hilltop, but kept them trained on Lord Thouars. "I have a choice," said Laurent. "You planned this," Nicaise had flung the words at Laurent. "You wanted him to see." "Did you think," said Laurent, "if you threw down a challenge to fight, I would not accept it?" The patron troops filled the eastern horizon, bright under the noonday sun. "My scorn and contempt," said Laurent, "are not in need of your leniency. Lord Thouars, you face me in my own kingdom, you inhabit my lands, and you breathe at my pleasure. Make your own choice." "Attack." Aymeric was looking from Thouars to his father. His knuckles, clutching the reins, were white. "Attack him. Now, before those other men arrive. You don't know him. He has a way of twisting out of things." "Your Highness," said Lord Thouars, "I have received my orders from your uncle. They carry the full authority of the Regency." Laurent said, "The Regency exists to safeguard my future. My uncle's authority over you is dependent on my subsequent authority over him. Without that, your duty is to break from him." Lord Thouars said, "I need time to consider and to speak again with my advisers. An hour." "Go," said Laurent. An order from Lord Thouars, and the greeting party streamed back over the field towards their own ranks. Laurent whirled his horse to face Damon. "I need you to captain the men. Take the command from Jord. It's yours. It should have been you," said Laurent, "from the start." The words were hard as he spoke of Thouars. "He is going to fight." "He was wavering," said Damon. "He was wavering. Guillaume will hold him firm. Guillaume has hitched his cart to my uncle's train, and he knows that any decision that ends with me on the throne ends with his head on the block. He will not allow Thouars to back down from this fight," said Laurent. "I have spent a month playing battle games with you over a map. Your strategy in the field is better than mine. Is it better than that of the border lords of my country? Advise me, Captain." Damon looked again at the hills. For a moment, between two armies, he and Laurent were alone. Laurent, with his patron troops flanking from the east, had equal numbers and superior position. Ultimate ascendancy was a matter of holding those positions and not falling to overconfidence, or any one of various reversal strategies. But Lord Thouars was here, exposed on the field, and Damon's Achiellan blood beat hard within him. He thought of 100 different Achiellan discourses on the impossibility of prizing Varetians from their forts. "I can win you this battle, but if you want Ravenel," said Damon. He felt his battle instincts rise within him at the audacity of it, to take one of the most powerful forts on the Varetian border. It was something not even his father had dared, had ever dreamed possible. If you want to take Ravenel, you need to cut them off from the fort. No one in or out, no messengers, no riders, and a swift, clean victory without the disintegration of a rout. Once Ravenel gets word of what's happened here, the defenses go up. You will need to use some of the patrons to create a perimeter, depleting the main force, then break the Varetian lines, ideally those closest to Tuar himself. It will be harder. You have an hour, said Laurent. This would have been easier, said Damon, if you had told me earlier what to expect, in the mountains, at the Vaskian camp. I didn't know who it was, said Laurent. Like a dark flower, those words unfolded in his mind. Laurent said, You were right about him. He spent his first week here starting fights, and when that didn't work, he got in bed with my captain. His voice was infectionless. What was it, do you think, that Orlan found out, that got him skewered on Amaric's sword? Orlan, thought Damon, and suddenly felt sick. But by that time, Laurent had his heels and his horse, and was galloping back to the troop. End of chapter. Hang on a second. Ah! Oh, I forgot that about Orlan. Oh my God, no. Oh. And to drop that in at the end of the... I'm sorry, I need to recover. I need to recover for a second. Because, you know, you remember in broad swaths that a trilogy or a story or a series or whatever is like really, really brilliant. You remember that in the broad sense. And then you read a fucking chapter like that. And you are acutely reminded of the absolutely sick genius that we're dealing with. And I had to sit on Amaric the whole time. But Orlan was just wrongfully killed. I didn't even put that together when we read that moment. I didn't. When Amaric was like, yeah, I had to kill Orlan. I didn't even. I'm so silly. Oh, I wasn't like, well, clearly he must have. Jesus. Even when I know things, I go plot stupid, for fuck's sake. Justice for Orlan, though. Man did not deserve that. Ugh. And then poor fucking Jord. So many reveals. So many twists and turns throughout that entire encounter, all just expertly unfolded in front of you like some kind of slow rising curtain on just an absolutely horrifying tableau of betrayals and plot twists and long simmering ideas finally coming to fruition. Oh, Jesus. Crap. Well, we can't exactly get into chapter 16 because we're too close to the end, and this was what I had allotted for today anyway. Shit. That's so good. You know, there's one sequence that I always remember, and it hasn't happened yet. It doesn't happen until book 3. But there is one thing that I always remember. It is always at the forefront. And I look forward to it every single fucking time. And we'll get there. How I forget this chapter is beyond me. Because I always forget exactly how and when Aymeric is revealed. Again, how? Beyond me. I don't know how you forget something like that. But I do. And then I never remember exactly how this goes down. Jeez. Yeah, Henry. Love to have you here, babe. Yeah. When you always remember enough of the genius to be able to emphatically look people in the face and be like, you don't want to miss Captive Prince. And like mean it with your whole ass head, even though you forget some really big things. Because yes, we haven't even begun to hit the payoff yet. Anyway. Which is, ooh, no. Now we can have real conversations about Aymeric. Oh, man. Aymeric fucking hurts. It hurts every time. And it's so well played. And when you go back or you read it again, this is one of the many reasons why this series stands up to rereads. When you go back and you read it again, everything around Aymeric is like, it's one of my favorite ways to do a very long burning like reveal like that, the way it plants things, because it's like, if you look at, I think there, if I remember correctly, there are very few like glaring things about Aymeric, but she still gives you all the pieces. And when you look back at it, it's like, oh, like, we get the angle on Aymeric through Damon's perspective, who makes, you know, who just paints things in a certain way. But actually, yeah, if you tilt the picture just a little bit this way, you actually see how everything aligns for an entirely different motivation. It is one of my personal favorite things, to where it's not necessarily like any one piece of evidence that you didn't hear about until one moment in time. No, it's kind of everything. You just, because of the way it's presented to you, you have no reason to look at it in that way until you know. He's Counselor Guion's son. He, etc., etc. Counselor Guion is in with the Regent. All kinds of things. It's so embedded in the whole thing. It's just nuts. Aymeric was always asking where they were going. Yeah, and now Damon, in hindsight, Damon is the one that kind of paved the way for Jord and Aymeric. Everything Aymeric does is so telling, but you have to have the right angle on it. And Couscous, thank you. Plus, you're also distracted by everything else that's happening in the story. Aymeric is just one little piece threaded among everything else. It's one of the easiest ways to hide things like Aymeric. Not just all the other ways that she hid Aymeric, but also just in the greater tapestry. It's actually very easy, and it's one of the biggest tricks that writers have. It's very easy to just have a whole lot of things going on so that you don't notice this piece over here or this piece over there. It's exactly why I go really plot stupid a lot of the time. Because when I'm really engrossed in a story, I'm not in an intellectual headspace trying to figure things out or put things together all that much. but I'm actually just trying to take in all the information that's coming at me, and I'm just trying to understand it all, which is how I'm fairly easy to trick. I pretty much don't figure things out until things are revealed to me. And that's actually how I prefer it, because I love being surprised. So I love this about me. Henry, yeah. Henry said, I still can't wait until he finds out what the regent did to Laurent. That's another thing that's just on the back burner throughout all of this that Damon just doesn't know. And because C.S. Picard has a lot of restraint as an author. Very, very well-placed restraint. She knows when to pull back. And so there's been some dramatic irony, especially like today. There was another big jab at the dramatic irony of knowing what Damon does not know, but it hasn't been overly like leaned on a lot of the time. But just enough so that it's still in the back of your mind that Damon just doesn't know this. And how does he find out about this? When is that going to happen? Because technically, like, there's so many ways in which that could happen. And that carries through the whole thing. Not to mention the ambiguous question of, does Laurent know who Damon is? If he does, then that colors his subtext and behavior one way. And then if he doesn't, it colors it another. And it's hard to tell your first time through, like, which it could possibly be. And that could also be revealed kind of technically at any given point in time. She's sick. She's sick and twisted. That's also a possibility, Tangerine. Worried that Damon would just never find out. That's on the table. Damon never finds out. Does Damon need to know? We want him to find out. But does he really need to know? Is it going to like all pass until, I don't know, if it's even slipped in like right at the end there, like by the way, like, you know? Also a possibility. Yeah. Yeah, as a reader, Liv, you're thinking it's like Damon would have to know if he wants real intimacy with Laurent. More also for Laurent's benefit, obviously, but also for ours. Because like right now, Damon thinks that he's getting closer and closer to Laurent and figuring him out more and more. He doesn't know that there's some huge piece of the puzzle missing. He could go along just thinking that he has all the pieces to the puzzle. But we, looking at this romantic, arc, we as the audience are like, but he's got to know this huge thing about Laurent, right? Like, that's how we got to cross that bridge somehow, because we want that, really known, deeper connection for them, unless there's some reason that we don't know about that Laurent wouldn't want Damon to know. Because he also hasn't told him yet, but of course he wouldn't tell him yet. But yeah, we as the reader are sitting in like, we want that kind of open, honest, true intimacy relationship from them, so therefore it has to happen, right? Oh, that's a good point. Crimson Joy saying that he's been given some hints about being at Marlis, right? We know he was at Marlis. We just know that that Laurent was at Marlis. We just know that, like, he was at the back. But another potential reveal, if, you know, Laurent knows that it's Damon, part of that reveal could definitely potentially be he may have seen Damon at Marlis. Yeah, Mari, Laurent telling Damon that Auguste was innocent and free from the fucked up family-ness. That was a particularly brilliant moment of dramatic irony, because we know the full meaning of Laurent saying that Auguste was not involved in any way in the abuse, the sexual nature happening there. Auguste had no part, likely no knowledge. I actually can't remember if Auguste knew or not. I don't think it may not be discussed. I think he may have just not known, is what think I'm remembering. Love Bunnies is checking out. Oh my god, it's 5:05. See, you guys, your conversations, too compelling. Because it's 5:05, and I have to go. So, like Love Bunnies, it is discussed. Ooh, I've forgotten about that. Oh shit. Okay then. On that note, I have to go. I will see you here on Thursday for chapters. Actually, now I wanna figure it out. Because we read about 70 chapters. Hang on. 270, 340. Let me see. Whereabouts are we stopping? Jesus, where are we stopping? So we should get from chapter 16 through chapter 19, and so we should stop at chapter 20 on Thursday, most likely. So that's what we have to look forward to. We're sliding into the end of this one. I'm all right. It's gonna be fine. 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 I'll see you guys in a couple of days. Please remember to take care of yourself. And holy shit, I forgot to say until just now that if you want to enter for a chance to win the beautiful, you know, covers, I've shown them off a lot. The beautiful cover version of Captive Prince of Volume 1 of this trilogy. If you would like to enter that, please put your name in a comment down below. Not in the chat, actual comment down below on the stream. You only have to enter once to let me know that you would like to be entered in the giveaway. And because I forgot until just now, we may actually also be accepting entries on Thursday as well. And then I won't draw until Tuesday, because we should be finishing this next Tuesday. So that works out pretty well, actually. Alrighty, so if you would like to try to win Captive Prince, Book 1, go ahead and enter your name down below, and I will see you in a couple of days as we come in on the end of Princess Gambit. I'm too excited. Okay, I'm gonna go. I love you guys so much. Please take care of yourselves. I'll see you Thursday.